Thanks everybody for being here. I'll have some more folks trickling in, but reaction button at the bottom, thumbs up. Everybody doing okay? Managing? If not, we'll make note of that. No thumbs up. Sad. They should. I don't know why they don't have the sad face. I guess that would just be crushing to folks. Welcome. I appreciate everybody getting up and moving from their dining room to their kitchen or living room or wherever they are. Real quick, just some housekeeping. If everybody can go to their screen, the 3 dots up in the corner, and rename and put your preferred name, what you would like people to call you if you do get called on. We've got a lot of different presenters and folks. And that's helpful for everybody. Reminder, if you can mute your mic, that way we won't hear dogs and kids and noises that we shouldn't hear. And you can use your space bar to unmute when you do have a question. You can also type questions in the chat box. We'll have folks monitoring those for both technical issues and content questions. And while it's nice to see you all on camera, it is optional for you to keep your camera on. And then if you do need to do something, step away, eat, juggle, get your hair done, whatever, go ahead and stop your video so we don't get jealous. I obviously need my hair done. I'm kind of rolling with the COVID cut or lack of cut. We'll see how that goes. So thank you again all for being here. We're super excited about this module and session today. You know, this is just so relevant right now, what's going on. And there's just, the Digital Scholarship Lab has created such amazing resources. And I think you guys can do a lot with this work and a lot with your students. I don't know how much you've seen, the history is illuminating. So these rogue historians running around putting up these great placards, and I see a lot of opportunity for engaging our communities in learning, and these guys will really help do that. So real quick introductions. Rob Nelson is the director. He is a historian of 19th century America and has a PhD in American Studies from the College of William and Mary. And he's been leading this project. Rob, did you start at UR? Were you at UVA?
I was never UVA.
No, okay. So he's been leading the Digital Scholarship Lab here since it started. Justin Madron, who you've seen, is the GIS project manager and analyst. He's put together the great story map piece, and just, you know, another great historian that's helped us a lot over the years. He has a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture and a Master's in Environmental Studies with a focus on geographical information systems and technologies. So you'll see him a lot in the videos in the module. And then Annie Evans is an educator. You were in Charlottesville before, right? Teaching there. Yeah. And again, you'll see the New American History work. She's all over those videos and just created some great resources for you guys. So this is a big group today. We have our Joe Notes Institute folks, which include our ECT award, schools that are implementing projects, whatever that looks like. So hopefully helping design some of that. We have our AALC, some cohort 1 folks doing some deeper learning. And then we have the AALC cohort 2. This is also, we're piggybacking a few of these modules with both the JOI course and the Making the Connections course. And then we have some of our coaches. So some of the coaches from last year with both, and then to meet the virtual needs and whatever going forward looks like, we've partnered with Ed Connective. So they're headquartered here in Richmond. So we've got some some of their coaches are doing the side-by-side learning with you guys. So, and then Dr. Spires, who is heading up half of these courses. Okay. All right. All right, check kid off your bingo, your Zoom bingo chart. So anyway, welcome everybody, and I'm gonna hand it off now to the DSL team. Enjoy, ask questions, and have a great morning.
Okay, I'm gonna share the screen, and y'all let me know when you can see it. Maybe use your reaction to give me a thumbs up. All right. Good morning. We're really excited to be with everybody. I got to meet some of you last week in some of the breakout rooms. And I think some of you were able to view the videos that Justin and I put together, but we realized that there are some of you who have not seen those yet. So hopefully those will be made available to those of you who are here with other projects and groups. But we're really excited to have an opportunity to share these maps. I'm excited for you guys to explore these maps because I've really enjoyed using them with students these last couple of years. And I think you will find lots of possibilities, especially given the moment that we're living in when you return to your classrooms, whichever way that we return to our classrooms in the fall. There's a bit.ly up here in the top left corner. So I wanted to pause for a moment. If someone could put that, maybe Stacy, put that in the chat for them. Or we'll just pause and give you a moment to type that in because I want you to have access to this presentation. I will put it in the folder where the other videos are for the DSL team, for those of you in the Joe Notes Institute. And then I'll also make sure that the Richmond City folks get it. I'll send it to your coordinator as well. So is it in the chat? Okay, perfect. So we can go ahead and move on. Okay. We'll do it that way. We're just going to do a little kind of just, I guess, thinking this morning. And some of you may be familiar with the See, Think, Wonder technique. If you have used that before in your classroom, or if you're familiar with Project Zero, they have lots of great thinking routines. And this is one that I really like to use with students. So if you'll just take a few moments, if you're not familiar with it, the idea is to give students one or more images. I like to have them compare two images. And these are two that have been on my mind, and I think probably everyone's in the forefront of our thinking these last several weeks. Rob mentioned the placards that have been going up the last 48 hours around Richmond, contextualizing some of the monuments or spaces where monuments used to stand in Richmond. So the idea is that you jot down what you're seeing in the image, what does it make you think, and then what does it make you wonder, what questions you still have. So maybe if we could take a few minutes in the chat box to share our thoughts on these. What are you seeing in here, and what is it making you think in terms of presenting information to your students when we go back, and then what do you still have thoughts about, or what are you still wondering? So let's give everybody a few moments to do that and communicate through the chat. And Justin or Rob or Stacy, or could I can't see the chat when I'm in presentation mode. So maybe if you guys could help me out by reading some of the thoughts in a few moments, give them time to process.
So here's one. What does the new Monument Avenue look like?
I like the way they phrased that, the new Monument Avenue.
I see hurt people using art to heal in the Robert E. Lee. What do students think it should look like? See the Lee statue contextualized with art next to Kehinde Wiley's Rumors of War. See similar styles. Protest and reimagining, wonder. When will the Lee statue come down? Connection between the monuments now and the images you have seen of the Berlin Wall. How do they scale up to tag the monument? I wonder why one statue has graffiti and one doesn't. See so much sadness. Loving the new aesthetic. I think we should leave the graffiti when they remove Lee. Change and effort for our society to rebuild. I think we are taking some great steps towards a better future. I wonder how long the Lee statue will stay. What are my students thinking and learning about this moment in Virginia history? This is a great observation. The Lee statue was photographed on a cloudy day while the Rumors of War statue is in the sun.
Oh, that's just because I am an amateur photographer. But I like that you picked up on that, and now I'm going to pretend like I did that on purpose.
Right. What voices will be represented in the new designing of future monuments? Writing a new chapter, literally. See the symbolism in the vandalism of statues and the vandalism of Black people. Again, interesting using the word vandalism, and what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it'll be very hard for us as teachers going back to school. You think about when kids write on the bathroom wall. I can't tell you how many times when I taught in Henrico, kids got sent to the office for tagging a wall in the restroom, and then another kid would snitch on them. Is that really an offense anymore? Like, we've sort of redefined what graffiti is in some ways. That might be a way for kids to, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Any other thoughts, Rob? You think we've?
Notice the Rumors of War statues a figure in motion. The horse's posture between the two are very different. Change is coming, changing times, a better tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, I think just to that kind of the vandals language and the graffiti, I did some work of this and some independent studies with some graffiti artists when I was in grad school. And, I think the difference between like a throw up tag where you're just making a mark real quick versus, really painting and communicating an idea. I think that's a, intent and thoughtful piece is important. I wonder who will be the new leaders and what great books will be written.
So you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with redlining? So before I say anything, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you think would be a connection between what we're seeing for those of you who live in that part of Richmond or live in Richmond, what we've seen the last several weeks? What connection is there to this topic? We're not studying monuments and memorialization. We've got tons of other lessons on that, and we could do several other workshops on that for you, and we're more than willing to do that in the future. But how does this relate to today's topic? Any thoughts? If you could put those in the chat, and then if my colleagues could share those so I can see them. How do we relate this to the topic of today?
Monuments are used as a selling point to white buyers along Monument Avenue. It was designed to be a segregated neighborhood, and the statues help reinforce that. You can do a story map of the statues beginning to now.
Justin will be talking about that later, and he'll also be talking about real estate. Okay, great. These are all great ideas and thoughts. So I thought this might be a helpful way for us to relate what's going on today to other things that you'll be having to teach in a new way in the fall, and be thinking of new ways to explain that to your students. So So we are just going to start off giving kind of a brief overview of mapping inequality and some of the other projects related to it. So Rob's going to take over here because we realize not everybody has seen our presentations and videos that we made. And some of you may have not been aware of the map before today or had an opportunity to explore it on your own. So I'm going to mute myself and let Rob take over, share screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a few minutes and let him do that.
Okay, hold on 1 second. You getting the screen share? Okay, so a little bit of a historical background about, pleasure to be with you, by the way, and great comments too about the connections between the monuments and redlining, and it's yeah, it's really hard to ignore how the spaces of our cities and just space generally is racialized, and how we've organized that with symbols and things, and also we've organized in ways that are not as visible to us when we walk around them, but are just as much about organizing it in terms of privilege and poverty in one place or another. So it's a perfect segue to thinking about space and inequality. And so what I'm showing you and I'll give you a little bit of background about redlining in the United States, the federal government's role in it, and particularly through the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was the agency that made these maps. So what you're looking at on the screen is a map that was produced by, again, a federal agency, the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And in this case, in 1930, the map for Richmond was produced in 1937, but they made a series of maps for trying to get like every city that had a population of 40,000 or more. So there's about 200 cities that have surveys done. And what their charge was and what they did was they graded neighborhoods, you can see it right here, like on terms of their mortgage security. And these were meant to be guidance, kind of like a quick guide to both private lenders and probably more importantly to federal underwriters who were deciding whether to give mortgage insurance for particular mortgages, about where loans were really safe investments and where loans were not safe investments. In other words, these are really consequential. It's about where capital and money ends up, and whose hands it ends up in, and whose neighborhood it ends up in. And so they used a pretty conventional grading scale, A, B, C, D. You guys are more than familiar with that grading scale, I believe. And then they produced these color-coded maps. In most cases, coloring them A, B, C, D, green, blue, yellow, red. And with the exception of blue, I think of this as like a traffic light. And I think this was what it was kind of meant to give that kind of quick guidance. Is think of a traffic light. Green means go. It means these are really safe neighborhoods that are going to maintain their value, and there's not as much risk in them. Yellow means the language they used was, it says third grade here, but the other language they used is definitely declining. And these were neighborhoods that they viewed as past their prime and on a downward trajectory in terms of value. So they asked them to, like a yellow light, be cautious, to maybe not proceed. And then red, D neighborhoods, like think of stoplights, stop. That these are hazardous neighborhoods that responsible, conservative, thoughtful lenders, both within the private sector and in the government, mortgages to. So essentially, this is the term redlining that we have, which is cutting certain areas off from access to mortgage capital. What we've done, so this is the raw map. What we did with mapping inequalities, we took those 200 or so maps, and we have overlaid them on in a digital environment over a contemporary streetscape with a number of visualization options, which I can talk about it. I'll briefly mention. So that we will obviously want to kind of respect the historicity of these maps. So we've what's called georeference them, and then we georectify them so we can overlay them and match them up to a contemporary web map, and then we can ditch them and just show how these line up with the streets, today's streetscape. Because obviously the past, it's a lot in common with that, but it's not the same precise streetscape. So that I guess I think prompt people to think about the connection between past and present and the impact that these maps had and which is really significant, the impact they had on today. So the question is, how do they come up with these grades? Where do these grades come from? And let me, there's lots of answers. Let's go to the fan, since we were talking about the monuments, and a lot of those are in the fan. What they would, they'd have the local realtors fill out these forms that looks like this one. And they'd want to know about the terrain and favorable influences, detrimental influences, basically means like access to schools, sewers and the like, just kind of basic infrastructural issues. They want to know, and this is really key, who lives there. So in case of the fan, they said the better people, which is really a very telling phrase, are moving out and tradespeople moving in. So in the 1930s, what they were anticipating, which did happen largely in the fan, is that you had white middle class people moving out, and you had this turn into more of a working class neighborhood for some period of time. And they mentioned the infiltration of renters who are working people, not owners themselves. And I'll just jump down, and they want to know about the building. So there's every conceivable type of brick house all mixed up. It's, they're little they're 25 to 40 years old, so they're not new construction in the fan in the 1930s. And the clarifying remark, which was often very interesting, it says, this area, though seemingly most desirable, is in conversion to rentals. Owners are moving west. These kind of early suburbanization. Along Monument Avenue on both sides for 30 years has been concentrated the culture and wealth of Richmond. The peak has passed, though this is a boulevard with a park center and monuments to Confederate celebrities at an important intersection. As the offspring of these homes are moving west, and 40% of reproduction costs would be hazardous in the event of acquisition. So just like these are aging houses, and they're pricey to maintain. Too many 3-story homes, high ceilings, high heating costs, obsolete. High reproduction costs. There are 2, 6, 12, and 24 family apartment buildings, hospitals, churches, schools, big homes being converted to apartments. So just, you get a sense of that. Let me close that one. So in that case, it's what we might call yellow lines, because it's really the building stock and trends towards wealthier people that had lived in the fan, their children living in suburbs on the periphery of the city. Let's jump right south of that, to Bird Park, and this I think is kind of more telling. Let's take a peek at this. They say the detrimental influences, there's an apartment along the park front, home for incurables east of Park, down on Powhatan Street, 4 family flats on Rosewood, et cetera, et cetera. Let's look at who's there. They're working people. But the reason they say, and if you guys know Bird Park, they say this area is yellow largely because the school for white children is in the Negro area D8, and because the Negroes of D8 pass back and forth for access to the William Byrd Park, which lies to the west. For this reason, losses on property are being taken. And you see this again and again in these, this is the technology of redlining. This is the point of redlining, is to reinforce segregation and make that best practice within the real estate industry from the government's perspective. So it's the government's stamping and seal of approval that the racial segregation and racial discrimination is what responsible lenders who are engaged in the mortgage market do. And the way they talked about this is, I'm going to come back up to this, this infiltration of, and there was they made it the logic, and they insisted that the infiltration of Negroes, of African Americans, and a foreign born were threats that compromised the value of homes and put them on a downward trajectory. So again, reinforcing segregation. You see that everywhere in these. So let me jump to, let's look at type real quick. So this is the listing for this one question, inhabitants type for Richmond. And the question they asked was, what is the general type of occupation, i.e. executive, businessmen, retired professionals, clerical, skilled mechanics or factory workers, laborers, etc. Like, what do people do? And in B neighborhoods, you see a lot of descriptions for what we call like white collar positions. So you have professional, salaried, upper class. You have high type salaried men. You have another high type salaried man, Petter type salaried, railroad employees, so a little bit more working class, and high type S Rosedale. In C, you have more blue collar. You have working people. We saw this in the fan. Better people moving out, tradespeople moving in, mill laborers in paper and rayon mills. In A, you don't see that at all. You have one, which is Laverna Park. You have representative businessmen, but then you have just best people, which is, you know, not the most precise answer to what is the kind of jobs that people have. And for D neighborhoods, you have, again, not a particularly precise occupational description, Negro, laboring whites, but every in every case, with the exception of D11, which is in Manchester, all the red line neighborhoods are predominantly African American neighborhoods, and they don't even bother mentioning the race of anybody in A, B, and C neighborhoods because those are presumed white. So you get the sense of how stark this is. White neighborhoods, with one exception, are all given A, B, or C grades. African American neighborhoods are all giving D grades. The other thing I want to point out about this is, like, for me, this is like a really powerful, window into the logic of that moment and of Jim Crow America, where I point out, like, not good answers to a job description in A or D, in some ways not, right? So the way I read this is that best people in Richmond means, this is like really, for me, so powerfully and so clearly conveys a kind of sense of intergenerational privilege that was operative at the time, right? So these people presumably had jobs, but in some ways it really did not matter what their jobs were, because they were the best people, right? They were, in some ways, you could call it like the aristocracy of Richmond. Their parents had been the best people, their grandparents had been the best people, and they were presuming that their children and their great-grandchildren, that there's a long line of intergenerational privilege that makes whatever one particular generation is doing in terms of making a living or doing a job kind of beside the point, because their wealth isn't and their privilege isn't grounded in their jobs. It's a product of who they are in some ways, they think it is because they've been enjoying it for multiple generations. And then on the other side, I remember, this clearly makes it very clear that this is written by white people from their perspective, right? Because they are outsiders talking about African Americans. And one way of reading this, you say, like, they don't care less about exactly what those people do, because it's kind of beside the point. Those neighbors are going to be redlined, going to be cut off from capital because of who lives there, regardless of what they do for a living. And on the other hand, I'd say this is consistent with the logic of commanding and extracting the labor of African Americans that began on this continent with the institution of slavery, and continued with sharecropping, and then continued in the 20th century in Jim Crow America with African Americans usually doing manual labor as domestics or gardeners. So in some ways, this notion of Negro as a job is is like, again, it's like the 1930s version of enslaved or slave, and or of sharecropper. It's this relegation of a class of people based upon the color of their skin to certain types of labor, and to have that labor commanded by and dictated by white people, and exploited by white people. Think domestics, again, like working in the homes of the best people. So one more thing. Yeah, I'll make one. I'm just gonna point this one more out. So like, this is just let's go to the map. So this is Washington Park. Let me go back to the map. Washington Park, which is an African American neighborhood on the north side of Richmond, and then there's a white neighborhood, Ginter Park. And often you'd have these pairings of white and black neighborhoods, because this is the this is the spatial manifestation of what I was talking about. Like, there are people who had domestics in their homes in Ginter Park, African American domestics, and those African American domestics couldn't live in that neighborhood, but they'd live nearby so that they could easily commute. They could walk into neighborhoods that they worked in. So you'd have this kind of symbiotic or even parasitic relationship between white and black neighborhoods, where they often kind of were paired together. And so the black neighborhood, Washington Park, gets a D. The white neighborhood, most of it gets a B, but then they have this one exception, which is C7, and you might have already jumped and seen this. And the clarifying remark is, like, it's the same neighborhood. Respectable people, but homes are too near Negro area, D2. I'm going to show one, before I stop talking, I'm going to show one more example. Is often my go-to. This is Tacoma, Washington. So unless you think this is like, this is a national phenomenon, this is not a Southern phenomenon. So I went to, one reason I picked this out is I went and did my undergraduate work at the University of Puget Sound, right here. And a little bit, just a few blocks to the northwest of UPS is a neighborhood called the Proctor District, which is a nice neighborhood today. It was a nice neighborhood then. And they gave it a B. They have professional clerical men and artisans working there. Their people are American born, so they're just like white native born people. But then they carved out this little D, and you usually don't see. We were just looking at one where they kind of put a little C buffer between an A and a D neighborhood, like they're too close to African Americans. And so this is unusual to have a B neighborhood and then have a little, and that's what the Proctor is true. It's just like 6 square blocks. And what the explanation, let's go there. They say, except as noted in clarifying remarks below, this area is identical in all respects with area B2. So it's just the same neighborhood. It's like no different, same houses. You know, you could driving around, you couldn't tell any difference. The clarifying remark is 3 highly respected Negro families own homes and live in the middle block of this area facing Verde Street. While very much above the average of their race, it is quite generally recognized by realtors that their presence seriously detracts from the desirability of their immediate neighborhood. So what I take this to, I mean, it's pretty crystal clear what this means. I'll just add couple more comments. When I see highly respected and very much above the average of the race, I take that to mean that these are other middle class families. They're probably the fact that they could afford to move into a white neighborhood and probably pay a premium for that probably means they're got higher incomes than many other white neighbors. Nevertheless, right, this is the insistence of redlining and these federal standards is that this becomes a D neighborhood. I mean, they make a gesture obviously to the market. They say realtors recognize that this makes this less of an attractive area, but there's a federal stamp of approval. So like one of the things that I want people to take away from this is that this is not just like a bunch of, this is not people in Jim Crow America all who are racist and all making and their collective racism manifesting in a real estate market, which makes segregation happen. This is the federal government saying like segregation is best practice. This is what you should be doing. This is what we will be doing when we are guaranteeing mortgages. And so the takeaway that this is, again, not just a product of the market, but it's a product of federal policy, and that we should really we need to grapple with. We've always needed to grapple with it, and hopefully this moment we're doing a little bit more of that. Any questions like at this point? I went through that fairly quickly, and Annie will teach. Annie has more thoughts about how to teach this in a K-12 environment. I think it's probably more suitable for high school, maybe a little bit of middle school, but Annie's got great ideas about this. But I'm happy to answer any questions if anything was unclear and needs to be clarified.
Justin's been doing a great job answering a few of those in the chat though. But Justin, is there anything that you wanted to add to or elaborate on based on the questions that you've been fielding in the chat?
People just had some really great comments. It seems like, yeah, most people are familiar with a lot of these areas and know, some things that we didn't know. I think Caroline mentioned that she actually rents from the same company that was listed on one of the area descriptions. Yeah. Which is, I was kind of blown aback by that. I don't know, I guess I never put that together that would even still be the case. So that was really interesting. Yeah, I mean,
you should write them a protest. Yeah, like, I mean, one thing I'm sorry, a little aside. Somebody, and this is one thing I should mention because this is coming up more and more. In most cases, there is not, I mean, there's racism everywhere, and it's obviously it's crystal clear, but in most cases, there's not, extraordinarily offensive racist language that's used. There's racist ideas, again, everywhere that are deeply offensive, but they never use the N word, for example. But there are some racial epithets that are used particularly towards Asian Americans on the West Coast. And I've had a couple of people write lately saying like, this shouldn't be up there. You should take it down. It's made me rethink like whether, I don't think I'm gonna do anything about it, but whether we like should, be excising, putting a little, asterisks in here to remove these. I think I'm leaning against that, but at the same time, what I'd say is like, if you're using this in your classroom, and especially like, I would say like an elementary or even a middle school, that knowing that language is in there, because people go crazy, and you might not want the kids exposed to that too. I mean, that's genuinely. So I just mentioned that, but the other thing I mentioned, because I have one person who said like, you should take this down, and what I want to do is I want to write them. This was somebody else's suggestion, and write them and say like, I can't because of, and lay out my reasonings, but what you might do is write your congressman, write your senator, and say like, I'm kind of appalled that my government did this in the 30s, and at minimum, like I'd like you to support some kind of a formal apology for the redlining practices of the federal government in the past, and even better, to redress those policies through better policies today. And I would say the same thing, like when you say like, this is your company, like you should write them and say like, man, you guys are messed up. You should offer some kind of apology. I'm not sure you want to do that with your people who you're paying your checks to, but still they bear some responsibility for this too.
But actually, Rob, you bring up a good point. In education, we've had a lot of discussions the last few years about taking things beyond just a classroom exercise or a classroom activity, even project-based learning. Everybody says, oh, project-based learning, that's so much better than teaching to the test or whatever. But the piece that seemed to be missing until recent years is that take action step. So, you think about a kid doing a National History Day project. I always had my students participate with National History Day, and I love that whole process, and I feel like it's some of the most authentic learning kids do. But even then, in the end, what do you do with that project when they're done? They get a medal, they get a certificate, that's it. It sits on a shelf or on somebody's server space now. But the piece that is being added to things like the inquiry design model, and I know some of the Richmond teachers are looking at that model instructionally, they're now adding that take action step. If you teach geography, the geo-inquiry process that National Geographic has been training teachers on, there's that take action step. So Rob, I think that's a great example, and maybe people in the chat, if you want to respond, if you've done anything similar to that, is not just having kids learn these facts or using these types of rich materials, but then what do you do with it? You know, the same thing with contextualizing the monuments. Someone wrote those placards. I'm guessing it was an adult, but I would love to think that maybe some students, maybe college students, had a hand in it. But, you know, could your students develop a new placard? Where else do we need some placards in Richmond or anywhere? I know we certainly need them here in Charlottesville. What else could you do with that instead of just learning it and getting a good grade on your project, right? So just some food for thought.
Yeah.
I would like to mention one kind of just technical piece, because this information is so deep and in depth. You can copy the URL, which is kind of a static view of what you're looking at. So if you find something interesting or that you want to share with somebody, the URL actually kind of saves that snapshot of where you are. So if you want, share D1 in Tacoma, Washington, that URL will take somebody directly there, which I think is a good piece to mention, because there's a lot of views and things that you find while you're in here that you might want to save. So
There was a question about the legacy today, which I'm going to do as quickly as I can, a couple other things. So I'm going to show you one other site, which Annie had on her. This is kind of a companion to mapping inequality. And we, okay, there it is. We somewhat uncreatively reused or adapted the name Renewing Inequality. And this is about essentially this a very similar subject, different moment in time, not about different of a moment in time. So if redlining happened in the late 1930s, this looks at arguably a more impactful federal urban and housing policy in the 1950s and 60s into the 70s, a quarter century of urban renewal. And urban renewal was a program to provide federal funding to help with better housing and with what they called a slum clearance program. And so in some ways it was dealing with, let's go to Richmond. It was attempting to fix some of the problems that redlining had exacerbated. We'll put the redlining grades underneath here. What they do is it's a complicated program, but one thing they would do is a locality would apply for money, they get money, and that money would be used to buy out people's homes, like through eminent domain. So they have a choice. It's like, here's the money for your home, get out, go find someplace else to live, because this is a slum and we're going to send in bulldozers and we're going to wipe this like a bomb came through. I mean, they just knock everything down, and they redevelop with public housing or commercial housing or sometimes middle class housing, sometimes highways, and then, so the point we make, there's lots of things you could say about urban renewal, but the point we want to convey in this map is how disparate the impact was for people of color than it was for white people. So there are about 300,000 families that were displaced by urban renewal. There's more than 3 people on average in a family. So there's more than 1 million people that are just forcibly displaced by urban renewal between 1950 and 1966. And the majority of those families were families of color. And so just looking at Richmond, you can see that these are the outlines of a number of urban renewal projects that happen in Richmond, and the 2 that we have displacement data for: Carver, which displaced roughly 500 families, 99% of them families of color. There were 6 white families displaced by that project, and then 17th Street, which is basically the same story. You have roughly 500 families displaced, 95% of them are color. You had 25 or 5% of these families were white families, and you can see, actually let me click on that, so you can see on this this graph how, well, I'm not going to find that graph. That graph's too complicated. And let's I'm going to show you one more view. So this is a national view of this, and so the size of the circles reflects the number of families that were displaced. So Chicago displaced 23,000 families through these programs. New York was the biggest with nearly 30,000 families, and then the color reflects the proportion which were white and which were family of color. So the purpler it is, the more family of color; the greener it is, the more is white families. And so you could see just how, in many cases, like these programs exclusively targeted families of color. Where Cincinnati, for example, 93% of families targeted and displaced by urban renewal were of color. And I'm just going to show you one other thing. This animation is probably not working well over Zoom, but whatever. This is the same view, and over on, let's call it the Y. Let's call it let's do the Y-axis. The percentage of the families that were white of the city that were white. So the greener the background, the whiter the city. So and then the purpler the background, the more people of color living in a city. And then this is the percentage of families displaced that were white. So if you're up in this kind of right corner, those were white cities that displaced lots of white families. And if you're down here at the bottom, and there's a reason I put them at the bottom, these means you're like really, really white cities that only displace people of color. So let's like St. Louis County, think Ferguson, right? They had 3% of their population were families of color, but 94% of their displacements were of color. So they surgically targeted the families of color through this program. Lubbock, Texas, similar thing, right? They had, I'm going to pick, well, that's not going to work because Lubbock had, 8% of its population was of color, but 100% of its placements were of color. So this is one indication of the impact of redlining and also the continued role of federal government in enacting and implementing programs that in cities that had such disparate impacts upon white and black people of color. And then one other thing I will show, let's see if this works. So this is something we're working on. It's very much a work in progress, but it's showing, it's supposed to show health disparities today, or what it will show is health disparities today compared to the redlining grades in the past. And what I'm showing right now is income. So income levels persist over, and the maps look remarkably similar. Where poverty is concentrated and where privilege is concentrated, but there are some exceptions. You know, grade tends to be kind of lower end of the. There's an example. This is Highland Park in Richmond. And it's got a tiny bit of upper, just a minuscule amount. Actually, I'm surprised by that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. This is Churchill, which is gentrifying, if you know Richmond, and you see a portion of it is upper income today. Anyway, so and then there's been studies also. I'm answering one question in a very long way. Been studies that have used our spatial data. This was from economists at the Federal Reserve, and they argue that 15 to 30% of wealth inequalities in cities that had these maps can be traced to these maps. I mean, and it's a complicated statistical argument, so I won't get into it. But they make a really persuasive case that these have a legacy and an impact that persists for years and for generations. Sorry, too much.
I've been sharing all these links too in the chat. So if you're interested in the Fed article, the Renewing Inequality link, it's all right there. And we'll include these, maybe we'll put this at the end of the slides as well.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing screen, Rob, is that okay? Can y'all see my desktop? Yeah. Okay. So some of the things that Rob highlighted for you, I want to make sure you guys realize you have all the links to those. So the mapping inequality, the first map, renewing inequality, and then we have learning resources developed to kind of guide you and your students through maybe the first time that you go to teach this. But as Rob said, I would strongly suggest that you kind of go through each of those modules in the lesson yourself. You know, he touched a little bit on some of the language that's included in some of the area descriptions. So I think obviously knowing your own students better than anyone else, you need to kind of front load a little bit of context for what types of words you're going to see, and you know, the way that people of different ethnic backgrounds were referred to back during that time period. Rob, when you mentioned that someone told you should take that down, that really kind of stung me, because I feel that we've done so much of that in education, you know, covering things up, hiding things, pretending like it didn't happen. And so I would love to help you respond to that particular person, because I think we do need to respond if you haven't already done so. I feel like, you know, that person needs to perhaps go through some of these modules and maybe hear you guys talk about these maps a little and get a little bit of their own education, perhaps. So I definitely don't think we should take anything down. We won't be doing that, I don't think. So anyway, so there are some additional resources at this link here that talk a little bit about what some other cities. Rob did a great presentation last week that I was able to peek in on. And some people were asking, my city's not on this map, right? And so, Rob, I think you said only 40,000 population or higher were included.
That's right. Yeah, and there are a couple notable exceptions. DC doesn't have a map, which that's one people always ask about, and it doesn't for whatever reason. Charleston, South Carolina doesn't have one, which is another decently sized city. But there's a huge number of these. I mean, they're not in all 50 states, but well, there weren't 50 states then. Not in all 48 states, but they're nationwide, and there's again 200 of them, cities large and small.
Right. So this is just a Google Doc that's linked into your slides, where I've just been compiling as I find them and discover them when I'm researching things for lessons, or now teachers are starting to send me things that they find. So if you in your work with some of you are doing the Real Richmond curriculum, I know, or involved in that project with the city schools, if you find things that are not on this list, I would love for you to send them to me. And my email and contact information is in the slides, and will be at the end of these slides for you to contact us. But I did want to draw your attention to, we've got a pretty extensive list going. So the DC project, some folks in the DC have started their own redlining map, where they're kind of doing what Rob and Justin have done, and others pulling together different documents. Here in Charlottesville, where I live and worked prior to joining this team, we have a Mapping Seville project, where we basically pulled records, public records. When did we get light, you know, electricity, lighting, indoor plumbing, those sorts of things, and then comparing those to real estate records. It's a lot of work. It's a very time-consuming process. We are only about a third of the way in terms of documents, but we've transcribed all those. And it started off as a journalist was just doing it. He was writing a report on redlining in Charlottesville, and it started around the same time as the Unite the Right rally happened here. And so what started off as a project he was doing as a reporter, we invited him into some classrooms. Then he started involving students in that work. And then it became a whole community-wide project. So they actually had transcription projects. They you know, would have parents and community members come in, help transcribe the documents, and then mapping them out using a project called Zooniverse. And Justin, I don't know if you've played with that much, but it's a way to have the documents like what Rob was showing with those original realtor documentation, very similar to that, putting those documents in and then mapping them out. So other cities are engaging in this work. So if you are wanting to compare to someplace else that's not on that map, you know, kind of check this list, because there are many places. Minnesota has some projects going on. And also, some of you were art teachers, I think, I recall from last week. There's one person who started a quilting project out of redlining maps. And so there's been some really creative ways to integrate art into this as well. So I did want to kind of draw your attention to this list because there's just a lot of things on there that you could unpack. And I know some of you are not just teaching history. We have people from other content areas in this group. So I wanted to make sure that you knew there may be other connections to your specific content area. The last thing I wanted to show on this was also Bunk. So Bunk is part of our New American History family, as I like to think of the Digital Scholarship Lab and Bunk. But what Bunk does is it takes articles, or in this case, all of our maps are embedded in Bunk. So this is our, the article related to the map that Rob just shared with us. And then over here, you notice there are some icons. And so you can look at other articles that are in Bunk that have a similar idea, in this case, redlining. You can also look for people that are mentioned in the article or same time period. And so once you decide kind of what rabbit hole you want to explore or go down, over here, you see this connection. It tells you there's 12 articles related to a same idea currently in Bunk. This changes all the time. So if you were to come back to this same main article, which is our map, in a week, the connections could be different because we may have added new content. But once you click on those connections, then it gives you a whole list of tags here that you can explore. So if you wanted kids to look at Hulk, you know, the Homeowners Loan Corporation specifically, or you just wanted to look for articles in general on housing policy, or you wanted to go straight just to redlining or residential segregation, each of those tags will take you out to other articles related to that. So there's lots of different ways to connect this. If you're an English teacher, you know, certainly having them analyze these articles would be a way for you to do some cross-curricular work with the history folks in your building. So I just wanted to, you know, kind of share that as another potential resource with everybody. I'm going to depend on Rob and Justin to keep looking at the chat and stop me if there's anything that we need to go about. I see some people are asking about some of the social emotional learning pieces to this, talking about trauma, looking at what's going on right now, and students feeling uncomfortable about that. And so again, that kind of speaks to what Rob said earlier, you know, preparing your students for the kind of language and some of the, and these are heavy ideas. And I would say you can start to use these in middle school. I probably would not use this with anything lower than a 7th or 8th grade class myself. But again, knowing your students and knowing their background, making sure that you prepare them for these types of more heavy conversations is really important. And kids are, you know how kids are when they get on things like Google Maps and Google Earth, the first thing they look for is their own neighborhood. And so, you know, some students may not be comfortable, you know, if you say search for your neighborhood on this map, that might not be the best approach to take with kids, because some of them are not going to want to perhaps say, well, I live in this neighborhood and this is showing up red, or I live in this neighborhood and it's showing up yellow. Some kids might not feel comfortable saying I live in this green neighborhood either. So I think like with anything that we do, you playing around with this map and you really getting familiar with it ahead of time would be really essential before you use it with students. Are there any questions about these resources before we move on? I want to make sure we leave time for Justin to get to some things that I think address the questions you had. So I included some slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this in the interest of time, but the next several set of slides, you know, something that came up about the current pandemic that we're living through is the disproportionate number of people of color who've been impacted by the virus. And so one way that we can, again, just like we did with the monuments in the beginning, is kind of addressing what are the things that are happening now that we can trace back in part to the redlining practices. So having these slides ready, and please like take these, use these, mix these up, you know, import these slides into your own lessons. That's why we create them. Everything has a Creative Commons license, so you can do that. But these are taken from mid-May, and so you may be able to find more current ones as you get closer to the school year on the health department website. but just having kids take time to just analyze some of these, you know, data. Just what are you noticing? You could use that See, Think, Wonder strategy or one similar to it. What are we seeing about the types of places and the types of settings where the virus is spreading? And yesterday, or was the day before yesterday, in the New York Times, we linked in an article that Justin shared about the more current, how they had to sue, the journalist had to sue to get the racial and ethnic information on COVID data. Virginia started putting it out because they were taken to task by our local journalists. And so at first they weren't releasing this information here in Virginia. And then those daily press conferences that Governor Northam was doing, journalists just kept at him and kept at him. Luckily, I don't think it had to come to a lawsuit. He just finally said, okay, we're going to start doing a better job of documenting this, and we're going to be transparent. I think having kids analyze sources. So these are, this is a letter that Mayor Stoney sent to the city council, and this is a tweet he sent out kind of around the same time, end of April, where they said, we realize we're not doing a good job sharing this data with you. So I think having kids look at these types of artifacts as a way for them to kind of uncover what is it that's related to this, rather than us just telling them, hey kids, redlining is directly related to what we're seeing now with COVID. I think having things for them to explore and kind of come to those conclusions with us guiding them is going to be a lot more powerful. So they see this guy on TV pretty frequently. They know he's their mayor. You know, what is his take on it? About a week after this tweet came out, I noticed I saw him going door to door delivering masks. I don't know if you guys saw that on TV. So Rob shared this map up in the top left. This is the renewing inequality map that he shared with you, with the redlining map kind of underlying it. So again, just kind of relating that back to the data. And this is a nice dashboard, a COVID dashboard that the spatial analysis lab at U of R provided, where they were comparing Virginia data to other parts of the country. So it's just kind of a smaller, more localized version of what you've seen with the Johns Hopkins map and so many others. So if that's helpful for your students, I think that Johns Hopkins map can be a little overwhelming because it's just so big, and this kind of pulls it in more local for your students. And then again, someone asked, how do we get to these documents? So inside there, this is a link out to, for example, showing you how to get to that, the original primary source, and then the area descriptions that have been transcribed, because a lot of times our kids are having trouble reading these, but these are a little more clear. What I like about it is you can hover over those descriptions and the kids don't have to keep toggling back and forth between the map. So that's a really useful feature that's built into that too. And some people don't realize that at first. So make sure that you hover over everything, because there's a lot of things that will pop up that will be easier for your kids to navigate rather than having 2 or 3 tabs open. So again, just kind of giving you a close-up view. I think Rob's kind of covered that already. These are some maps that Justin created. Justin, I'll let you talk about these if you want to unmute, or do you want to share your screen or do anything with it, or just talk about them? And I have each of these kind of blown up bigger too, if you want me to advance the screen.
Yeah. No, this is fine. Yeah, you can I'll just have you kind of shuffle through these. Yeah, I guess generally overall, I just wanted to talk about how, yeah, these redlining and the practices of redlining have persisted into present time, right? So this, I think, can really help maybe ground the information that you guys have learned today by setting it in, yeah, some present time, right? Talking about current health risk. So here's a map that shows poor health, which is defined by the CDC. So it's a survey they did that looks at % of adults that report fair to poor health. And we see, you know, not shocking, right? We see kind of deep South Appalachians, and then some native lands out in the West. This overlays with poverty pretty closely. So in the next map, we should see we have income below poverty level, right? And we see not, you know, exact overlap, but we see some consistencies. And if we go to the next one, which is a COVID-19 map by population, this was actually from, I think, end of April. So it's fairly old now. And what's interesting is that we've seen spikes actually head more into the south. So if we were to update this map, which we'll kind of look at in the next slide, it's even more, it lines up even more, right, with poor health and poverty. So we see this was, as Annie mentioned, this is a map done by the New York Times. They had to sue the CDC to get this data. They don't have it for every state, so we can see Tennessee, Missouri, and a couple other states are missing. Virginia actually provides this ethnicity data. So in the link I provided in the chat, you can actually download this data or take a look at it. But it shows, yeah, the disparities of who's being impacted by COVID-19. And if we take a closer look into some of our own cities, we see this as well. So all this is to say that there's a lot of interesting and really good research and scholarly work that's being done with the redlining data. So our site, you know, is kind of telling the history of redlining, right? And the, you know, showing the maps and showing the area descriptions, kind of explaining the history. But there's a lot of good researchers and scholars that have been doing work to compare this to current day. So Rob showed the NRCS data that's looking at health disparities, and COVID is right up there with that. So there's researchers that are looking at urban heat island effects. So if you're teaching environmental justice, you know, places that were redlined are disproportionately hotter, right, than places that were not redlined. This has to do with a lot of factors such as, you know, tree cover, urban, you know, dense urban areas. So all this affects health, right, which affects all sorts of things, life expectancy, disease, things like that. So yeah, I think these resources and these additional scholarly work is helpful in kind of grounding it to current events that students can kind of see, and then walk back to understanding kind of, you know, where this started. So, you know, it's not in a vacuum, right? All this has consequences that we're still dealing with today. And there's some good resources here to kind of help push that along.
Thanks, Justin. Rob had some additional new scholarship that he's been working on that also is kind of related to this topic. So do you want me to just navigate these two slides, Rob, or do you want to share the screen? What do you prefer?
Since I don't know what you're talking about, I'll go with you navigating. Oh, we already did this. We showed this.
Yeah, these are yours. Oh, you did. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
we looked at it, so yeah, we can skip this.
Okay, we can skip both of them. All right. And Justin, did you have anything else? Someone in the chat, I think it was Bridget, but it might have been Caroline or someone else, had mentioned about the homeowner rate.
Mortgages. Yeah. So I thought this would be, and we have a lot more of these resources if you're interested to look at redline areas and kind of what they're doing today, whether that's mortgage rates. So this was actually done by Zillow, which I don't know if you're familiar with, is kind of the real estate giant now, and they have a lot of data. So they kind of used the polygons in the areas that were redlined and looked at current home values. And they found that, and you can actually look on the site, I'll put the link in here in a second, you can actually look city by city to see how the city that you're interested in, the neighborhood have risen or not. But they found that large proportions of redline neighborhoods have lower home values than non-redlined areas, which is not particularly shocking. So A neighborhoods, which is best, has risen by 230 some %, while hazardous has only climbed 203%. except for the exception of Haverhill, Massachusetts, is the only exception where D areas have risen more than A. Does anybody have any idea why that is? Probably. And we see this in multiple cities. So this is probably an effect of gentrification that's happening. And so sometimes you can see C areas have risen more in some areas as well. But yeah, so there's a lot of studies being done on this kind of front. So I'll put that link in there real quick.
Thanks, Justin. So are there other questions? I mean, I think there's been a lot, we've thrown a lot at you, and we don't mean to overwhelm you. This is just such a topic that it's been brought up so much. I mean, how long has this map been out, Rob? Three years? When did you first release the map?
2016, maybe.
Okay, so yeah, a little
My
longer.
time moves very quickly. I don't know anymore.
Right, so.
2016, I think.
But, you know, the map's been out there for a while, but it just seems like in the last 6 months, I think starting with people started mentioning redlining a lot with Bloomberg campaign. I know it kind of surfaced there. And then with everything going on with COVID, it just seems like we're getting a lot more, it's becoming a term that people are more familiar with. I don't know that everybody, I don't know if it was a household word prior to, you know, March or April of this year. And now it seems that it's a topic that people are at least hearing about. They're hearing the phrase, they're seeing things about on the news, but this is a way that you can, you know, kind of make those connections for your students. So we have what, about 15 minutes left, Rob, is that correct?
Yeah, and there's a really interesting, I'm trying to weigh in, and I don't have good answers to this, but I'm finding the conversation about how you bring this up with without traumatizing your students or without, like, you know, really impacting them emotionally, a really thoughtful one. And I have this, I teach the slave trade, and typically I end up having, like, I never have one African-American student in my class, which is kind of, I don't really know why that is. And I'm always sensitive to, they're always like sensitive, and I'm like, they don't have, just making sure my white students don't want them, like, they have to speak for black people or something like that, or something stupid like that. So it is, but I have the luxury of teaching 18, 19, 20-year-olds who obviously have more, maybe not obviously, arguably have more emotional maturity than high school students or middle school students. So I don't have easy answers to this. I mean, I reiterate, I think I said this in the chat, like, I think it's important to equip students that they can get progressively more comfortable with having hard conversations about race, because this is so important in our society. But obviously, how you do that, you have to be attendant to the emotional capacities and the social situations in the classrooms that you have when you're doing this. This is hard stuff. This is really hard stuff.
Absolutely. And I like the statement that Marjorie made in the chat, where she said that she liked the communication in the chat, reflection of how much we care about our students and trying to be truthful but sensitive. And I think that's going to be our challenge this fall when school resumes. And I guess my biggest thing that I'm even trying to figure out, and I don't have my own classroom anymore, but it's, you know, having that face-to-face contact every day with your students, especially when you get the new group of students in the fall, you may or may not know those students at all. And establishing those relationships through Zoom is not going to be the same as what we started off last school year, right? So how do you still make that connection? You know, this is not the sort of topic you tackle in the first 9 weeks, I would say, of school. You really have to build up some trustful relationships and get to know your students before you start to talk about this deep of a content. But there are things that you can do to kind of front load skills, you know, map reading skills and things like that, so that by the time you get to these more challenging topics, you aren't spending time on the nuts and bolts. You're more spending time on helping them relate to the content, but making sure we're doing it in a careful way that is not going to traumatize a student, as some people mentioned in the chat. So I don't know if, has anyone in this group, and you can tell us through the chat so we can all see it, or if you want to unmute your microphone, has anyone taught redlining already? Is there anyone who's already currently been teaching this concept in their class? And if so, do you have any, suggestions for our colleagues here on ways that you kind of broach that subject, or things that you found helped make it a valuable teaching experience, but not traumatic? Anyone already using this concept in your curriculum? I don't see anything in the...
Looks like Chad has. So, I just wanted to say, so there's a lot of elementary school teachers, and as Annie mentioned, it's tough. And so thinking about one of my goals with this in the modules is, we keep hearing there's institutional and systemic racism, and I think those are kind of gloss overs, and a lot of people are saying that, and this shows it. So as an educator, I think my goal is that you guys know what institutional racism looks like and systemic policies. So now this really supports that. So you standing in front of your kids in elementary school, having that knowledge, you can talk about maybe, so again, I don't know the trauma piece, but, it's probably broader conversations the younger the kids are on, loans and owning houses and things like that. But, the trauma-informed piece is huge. And, we typically do that as one of our modules. And it sounds like we could tap into some folks to really drill down and support you guys in doing that. It seems like there'd be a good need for that. So we'll look into that. So if you have resources, I know Elena shared a great resource. So I think that would be worth, we can create a whole nother module that just deals with that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an answer to anything, but.
And Samantha, I love the comment that Samantha made where she says anticipating the hard conversation is usually worse than the conversation itself. And I agree. I think a lot of times we talk ourselves out of bringing certain topics up because we are afraid that we're going to offend somebody, or we're not sure we know the right way. And then it never gets taught and it never gets discussed. And then a whole other group of kids gets passed on to the next grade level without having been exposed to these topics. And I think, again, if you have that great relationship that you start and you consistently nurture that relationship with your students as the year goes on, that you can say to them, hey guys, today we're going to talk about something really uncomfortable, and I'm uncomfortable talking about it. So it makes sense to me that you may be uncomfortable talking about it, but it's something that we need to discuss. And it's a part of our country's history. And it's something that, and if you at any time feel uncomfortable, let me know. But I think that if we keep avoiding topics, that's why they persist, right, in our society. We keep avoiding them and pushing them under the carpet. The person that mentioned, wow, that's my realtor. That's who I currently rent from. I had no idea they were involved in this. And Rob saying, well, take them to task, like write them a letter and say, well, now that you know. I mean, I'm guessing that most of the people that work at Pollard and Bagby now have no clue that this, or maybe they do. But they were also the people that I rented from when I lived on Monument Avenue 30 years ago. So, and I lived in one of those houses that was converted to low rent apartments because I was a first year teacher. So that's all I could afford. And so I think addressing that, sharing things like that, my students who are now in their 30s and 40s that were my first class I ever taught, they've been sending me pictures from Monument Avenue the last 3 weeks. They've been live streaming it and tagging me into it, knowing that I lived on that block. And so I think when you have a personal connection with them, they are a lot more forgiving. And so you can have these conversations. And I think it also means a lot to kids when you say, I myself am learning about this. I'm reading, so I mentioned some great reading that they're doing. The Color of Law, I highly recommend that one. And there were some other books. And Marciano, I think you're in here, my friend. I think I saw you. I didn't realize you were in here earlier. You talked about some of the teaching tolerance modules as a great place to start. And I agree with that. So you can say to the kids like, hey, I'm giving myself homework at night. I'm reading this book about redlining, or I'm reading this book so I can understand better. We're going to learn this together. And I think kids appreciate that. And Keisha talked something about making sure that students hate the police, that there's this perception now that they hate all the police, and being careful that we don't add white people to the category of who they hate.
Kaisha. It's
Yeah.
Kaisha.
Oh, Kaisha, I apologize. Do you want to expand on that, Kaisha? Do you want to talk a little bit more about what your thoughts were on that?
I think I know how to get some things rolling in a chat, but like when I first I mean it's fine. I think first, like when I saw the redlining, I actually got super emotional. I started crying because I'm like, man, people of color, they were just oppressed. And it's like there's no real explanation for it except for their skin. And so for students, especially like in the East End where, you know, there's a lot of trauma dealing with policing, and, you know, there is hate in their heart towards police officers. And so for me, even asking the questions about not wanting to trigger kids, like what type of trauma that may be added to it, I know now there's a lot of white teachers in our school now, and I'm like, I don't want my students to walk around thinking without more information that, you know, now look what these white people did, and now I hate white people, and now I'm gonna go in this classroom and disrespect this white teacher, because, you know, it's deeper than that. And that's why, to me, it's very important that whatever, like trauma informed, like for example, I felt as if this stuff can roll off your tongue so easily, you and Rob's tongue so easily, with no emotion, you know. And so for me, I'm like, wow, I need to, if I were presenting something like this, I need to make sure there's space in the room where there can be reflective moments, where we're not just flying through this, where we are very aware of what could happen in this moment. You know, that is trauma-informed care. And that's like what was saying in the chat, some adults can't even handle that. And it's probably going to be more of the teachers of color than, you know, white teachers, because it's so deeply connected. And I loved like what Tiana even said, like, well, she's from the North, so her emotions may not be as strong, but because these are emotions that can just drive your emotions, is something that we have to be sensitive of and think, oh, we can put this course together and throw it out there without having any type of trauma-informed care. That's not gonna roll off. It's not gonna look very well, because emotions start getting into these type of conversations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I hope that we didn't give the appearance that we aren't emotionally connected, or that, I mean, this is, and maybe we did fly through it too fast. And I love that you gave us that feedback. You know, normally we're presenting these live and in small groups, and we are able to give, you know, a little more time in between to process. So it's kind of hard to do this heavy of a topic from afar. But I do feel you're right, because having worked in the East End, I taught in the Verina area, which bordered on the eastern end of the city of Richmond, and a lot of, you know, it was a difficult connection our students had, relationship they had with the local police. I know, you know, things have changed. I haven't been there in the last 10 years, but living here in Charlottesville, we just recently voted to defund the school resource officer program. So this year there will not be school resource officers in our buildings. And I know that there were a lot of different opinions about that. And it was a close vote in our own local city council. And I don't know where Richmond City is with that, or if you even had that program still. But I think your point about bringing up, you don't want kids to turn now and say all white teachers are bad, just to make a blanket statement. That is something that, you know, all of us are gonna have to think about, like, how do we navigate all these different, you know, racial tension and feelings of distrust as these things are coming to light. So I think it was really brave of you to share that. Do others have thoughts on that? Does anyone else want to unmute theirs and talk a little bit about that?
I did.
Sorry, go ahead.
Richmond pretty much has already opened up a window for us to talk about redlining. With the new rezoning of the schools that's supposed to happen this school year, a lot of my students were asking, when I taught in the East End, I taught at Martin Luther King Middle. I don't think you can get more deep into disparity by working in that area. You're completely surrounded by basically all of the housing projects. I'm talking about Creighton Court, Mosby Court, the real hardcore ones. And when I would talk to them, when I started talking to them about the rezoning, first question came up, why don't they want us to go to their school? And when they said us, they were referring to white people not wanting them to come to their school. What is wrong with them? Where now I'm at Huguenot, and the same topic, you know, if I lived 3 blocks over, Miss Brown, you mean to tell me I could still come to Huguenot, but now I can't, I gotta go to George Wythe? So what's wrong with me? So I think Richmond has already given us a segue into the redlining, but there was no trauma taught classes when this happened. You know, you've got children that have lived right across the street from each other, but because they're coded differently, they can't go to the same school. So they're saying, oh, well, you're better than me. So I think we kind of dropped the ball, but because before we started rezoning, there should have been some trauma taught classes. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It'd be interesting to take that new school zoning map and lay that as another layer over Justin and Rob's maps. I wonder what that might look like. Was it Samantha that wanted to also share something, I thought, before?
Well, I was just going to mention that, like, we have to remember that the reason why we're diving into this work is so that we can better understand the generational trauma that has happened and how that affects families. And, like, you know, of course, like Kaisha made a really great point about we don't want to insinuate any more hate or any more racial tension or divide. But I think it's important for us to look at our history, because if we don't know our past, we don't know our future. And a lot of it was wiped away from us, and we don't understand some of our cultures or where we came from and all this. So it's all tied into this. And we just have to remember, like, when we're teaching these things, we step into these conversations, that we have intentions made clear at the very beginning. Why are we doing this work? Why are we engaging this work? Why do we think it's important that you need to know this? And what should you be able to gain from it as well? And then the note about the rezoning maps over the redlining maps, I would love if you guys would actually take the time to do that. I would really love to see how that overlays. That would be informative to me as a teacher and someone who lives in the community as well.
Yeah, we'll look into that.
Thank you,
Yeah, we'll look
Samantha.
into that.
I'm just trying to monitor the chat, and I know, interest of time, Rob, is 10:30 our expiration date? I couldn't remember.
Yes, it is.
I thought, and I think Bob put school zoning is the new redlining. So that would be an interesting map. I didn't mean to give Justin and Rob a homework assignment, but now I feel like we kind of gave y'all a homework.
Well, I feel like
I stepped into that one.
I wish we had more time to have this conversation, because this conversation is, I feel like, more interesting than what I should have cut that short, because this is a really interesting and important conversation, and I'm really sorry we are ending it.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to try and join in on some of these other sessions as the Institute goes on, for those of you in the JOI. But my email and our contact information is included on these slides. I'm going to try and take all the great links and suggestions that people shared from the chat and add them on another slide at the end. So if you check the slide set back later on this week, I'll make sure I get those added in there in the next couple of days. And please, you know, reach out to us and let us know if you go to get ready to start using these maps and you get stuck or you need help. You know, please reach out to me and let me know if I can be of any help, even if it's just bouncing ideas off of you. Or if some of you guys, you know, that teach in the same school or in the same part of the city decide to get together and do something, like, I would love to be included in on that if I can be helpful at all. MI knows how to get in touch with me. If he's your social studies coordinator, he always knows how to reach me as well. So we want to be helpful to you in this work moving forward, knowing that it's difficult and challenging work. And we want to be a resource for you, not just for this week or today's workshop. So please kind of stay in touch and let us know how we can help with it, because it's important work, as Samantha said. It's really important work. It's difficult, but it needs to be out there, and kids need to understand this so that they can kind of understand where things are. And the only way we can move forward is to look at the past. I agree with the comment that someone else made. I'm going to let Rob kind of wrap things up.
All right. Again, thank you guys for sharing all this powerful work. And I think everybody's talking about, you know, the importance of knowledge and knowing the past. And that's why we put this in there. So we're leading your explorations with sketching and storytelling and the rest of this module through that informed lens as you're making things, and we'll see creative ways to do that. I will say we do have the DSL is scheduled for office hours this Friday at 9. So that might be another opportunity for people to process and then come back together at 9 this Friday. And Stacy will be sharing that link out and all the other links that were shared today. So that might be an opportunity to have a follow-up conversation. And if you have ideas, resources for, you know, someone that's great at TIC or SEL, we can share those with us, and we can reach out to some folks and maybe work with Mr. Is on designing some other modules. So again, thank you all for being part of this. Your Module 2 instructions and all these resources are in Blackboard, and we'll share in a follow-up email. Again, thank you all for your time, and have a great rest of your week. Bridget, it's office hours on Friday, so it's not it's only if you want to have questions for the presenters.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.